Good evening.
Good to see
Good evening,
everyone.
Ken.
Glad everyone got back from feast okay. Here we are, just a few days after the feast. Everybody's ready to go. Tonight's episode is 361. And does Romans 14 eliminate the core seventh day Sabbath law of God? Dr. Ricks, if you'd start us out, that would be great.
Okay, this guest says to a waiter, here's some real groaners, can you bring me what that lady at the table across the room is having? Waiter says, sorry, sir, but I'm pretty sure she wants to eat it herself. Here's another groaner I got from someone from Texas. Why did the golfer bring two pair of pants? Two pair of pants. He's afraid he might get a hole in one. Okay, here's a unique one. You got to listen to this one carefully. Why do bicycles fall over? They're too tired. And this is one of my favorite. This couple you'll see them in the comic strip called the Lockhorns, and they insult each other, especially the wife insults the husband on a regular basis. The husband's in a car dealership and he's stroking this beautiful red convertible sports car and he's smiling. His wife says, hate to break it to you, Leroy, but you're too old to be having a midlife crisis. Some of us, as we get older, we understand that. There's no excuse for our midlife crisis. Okay, does Romans 14 eliminate the core seventh day Sabbath law of God? This is kind of a way of helping us strengthen our belief because every now and then you're reading the Bible, depending on the translation, and you look at the commentaries and they say, well, whatever, we'll get to what they say. The first point that we'd like to make is you could read the New Testament from end to end, and nowhere does it mention an alteration in the Sabbath day or the Sabbath law. It's not in there. And of course, honest writers of the commentary will admit that. Nowhere is there a written up explanation. Here's why we changed the Sabbath. Here's when we did it. Here's our justification. Nothing. But they say, but there's one exception. And they get all excited. And that's Romans 14, 4, 5, and 6. We're going to look at it and see if we can unravel it, peel it back, and deeply understand it, and see why it is not an exception to the fact that the New Testament does not alter the Sabbath law. So, Ken, would you put on the screen Romans 14?
All right. Who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. One person esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind.
The first thing I think is interesting, you can see the topic is judge another servant. It's about judging each other. And nowhere in this section is the word Sabbath, Sabbath law, fourth commandment. None of that's mentioned. And esteeming days, well, that's how people evaluate it, especially very, very religious people. But it's not saying there's an alteration in the law, just how people esteem certain days. Here's what Paul was telling the Romans. Um, he was not saying, you can choose any day you want to worship on, just any day. He was not saying that. He wouldn't say that. As I say, the word Sabbath is not mentioned anywhere in this chapter or the next one. Paul is talking about not judging each other. Romans 14 and parts of Romans 15 are really Paul's lessons in Christian tolerance. And we can learn a lot about Christian tolerance. He wasn't saying God's law was changed. By the way, I've started churches before, and I can tell you this for a fact. If you are starting a church or reorganizing churches, whatever, and you tell the people, you can choose any day you want to meet on. Some of you want to come on Friday, that's fine. Some of you want to come on Saturday, that's fine. Some of you want to come on Sunday or Monday, that's fine. It would not work. You cannot do that. Or you can pick any day you want to show up. You have to organize and be there at a certain date. And of course, we all know what that date should be. The Bible is full of it. There are a whole list. By the way, you can go to the New Testament, pull up the word Sabbath. It's in the New Testament all over the place. But they don't defend the Sabbath. They just take it for granted. But does that make sense? It was never really an issue. That's why they just mention it. But they don't defend it. They just take it for granted.
Sure. And if they were trying to change the day, they would have made that a very clear argument and discussion. They wouldn't have hem-hawed around it and used cryptic, wording for us to interpret later on. It would have been very clear.
And by the way, there are Jewish critics who pop up all the time about circumcision and a few other things. They would have gone crazy. Think about it. There's no way Paul could have. I don't think Paul couldn't even have defended that if they had been keeping the day of the sun god. But I realize you have to have a little experience with the New Testament to see that. But that is really the truth. You really can't do it with everybody picking which day to meet. Because you could get that impression somebody thinks every day should be esteemed. Well, that's not. They were talking about food and eating and which days to fast on, but they were not talking about changing the Sabbath law. So to get the context, let's go to Romans 14, 1 and 2. And can you read that for us, please, Ken?
Receive one who is weak in faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. For one believes that he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables.
Yeah. I want to emphasize the word weak. Now, Paul is saying don't argue with them or beat them up or judge them. I think he's saying kind of give them room to grow and mature. But the reason why I think the word weak is important, and I want to ask you all if you see it the way I see it. People who are super picky, or what I call purist, in the wrong kind of unbalanced way, are often weaker Christians, weaker believers in God, and they're looking for some picky little thing to make them appear more spiritual. They're not really balanced. And after you've been in the church for a long time, you get more balance and you're not so picky. In other words, the ones who were the purest were the weak ones. And that's the opposite of what most people would think. Any thoughts, Ken?
Yeah.
Or Tom, sorry.
I'm sorry, who are you calling on?
Well, whichever one of you wanted to speak first. I think Tom wanted to speak first.
Oh, I didn't say anything, but Ken can go if he wants to. As it says in verse 1, if you go back to the previous chapter in the last verse, he says, in the first couple of verses, last couple of in the previous chapter, he said, let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying, but put you on the Lord Jesus Christ and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. And then it goes on to say, him that is weak in the faith receive you, but not to doubtful dispensations. One believes that he may eat all things, another may eat only herbs. And obviously, he's not talking about eating unclean things here. There's nothing in here that says that. And nowhere will you find it saying that it's okay to eat unclean things. When it refers to eating, it's implied that they're eating the clean foods that God allows. there would be no reason for them to discuss otherwise. I mean, he's talking to Jewish people here, and they understand all that. So no reason to explain it. So, for example, I might decide, I don't want to eat meat anymore. I just want to eat vegetables for health reasons or for whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just because I don't eat meat doesn't mean I'm disobeying God. I'm keeping the laws and doing whatever I'm supposed to do. And so you shouldn't judge people just because they don't want to eat meat, for example. Or maybe they don't want to eat vegetables, which I wouldn't recommend because you wouldn't probably live very long. But I guess that's the point I'm trying to make is don't judge people on what they do as long as what they are doing is according to the laws of God.
Yeah, if they want to be a little extreme. By the way, and if you read 1 Corinthians chapter 8 through 10, there's a lot more of the discussion of it. But I didn't want to focus so much on the pagan side of it. I want to focus more on the Sabbath side. But what existed in Rome, all the butcher shops or butcher shambles had at least a percentage of the meat offered to idols. And what would happen in a city like Corinth, Rome, they had a ton of pagan temples. And some of the meat was eaten by the people who gave the offering and some by the priests. But a lot of meat was left over. And, it was good. Most of it would be good lamb and cattle for the most part. That's what people sacrificed, the better meats to their pagan gods. So the meat market people would buy it up at a discount price and they would put it in their shambles. The truth told is that probably if you walked up to a butcher in Rome and said, you got all these sides of beef hung up here, which ones have been sacrificed to pagan gods and which ones haven't? Probably the butcher couldn't remember for sure, maybe 30, 40, 50%. He'd probably say, well, what do you want to hear? Tell me, you try to figure out what that's sure that. And they probably quickly figured out you couldn't trust the butchers. They don't know, they don't care. And that if you bought meat, and in those days, I know they could salt meat, but because of refrigeration, they probably have to go to the butcher shop more frequently than we do, no deep freezers. And they figure sooner or later you're going to get meat offered to an idol. So a lot of the more purist Christians were afraid of the meat. Now to us, we would only chuckle at something like that, but I want to try to put it in the context of people who lived in the first century. If you were someone who was a proselyte to Judaism, but maybe for 35 or 40 years of your life, you had participated in maybe Zeus or Saturn, Astarte, Venus, whatever the names were, you had participated in those sacrifices and often they had drinking and partying and drums and music and the meat, and in some cases, temple prostitutes. That was in your psyche. And somehow the meat connected to it. And you were afraid, if I eat this meat, I'm going back to my pagan ways. That is for us hard to imagine, but it's clear when you read what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10. He told them the idol is nothing. Don't worry about it. But to people who had lived it all their life, and maybe the last 4 or 5 years they were proselyte to Judaism, it was still in their emotional baggage.
Yeah, I think I can give a good modern day example of this. There are some in the church that when they purchase food, packaged food, they look at all the ingredients, and if they see something in there that may be unclean, and I'm not going to give an example of that because there's, sometimes they put or use certain things to prepare certain types of foods that may not be clean. I'll tell you what, one example is someone said recently they looked at their container of yogurt. It was, strawberry or something, and had obviously they put coloring in it. Well, the coloring that they used, or what they used to make the coloring, was some sort of a very small beetle insect that's, you know, microscopic, and you mash it up and it makes red coloring or something or another. So they said, well, okay, because that's in there, I'm not going to eat this because it's unclean. Okay. Another person might just eat that and not worry about it. So you shouldn't judge someone based on whether they looked at it carefully or didn't look at it carefully. One way or the other, they're both doing what they're doing to the best of their ability, and it is to God, as it says later on, and we read earlier in those verses 4-6. You know, you're doing it to God one way or the other. If you don't think you should eat this because it's not right, you're doing it because you believe you're honoring God. The other person may go ahead and eat it, not realizing or not worrying about it, and they are too also doing it for God.
Yeah, I remember when I first got into, was first baptized and was really getting interested in the church. And one of my bosses came from Boston. And we had lunch across the street from where I worked at the time. And, you know, he had this shrimp thing, and I just ordered a hamburger or something like that. And he said, well, this is really good. Don't you want any? I said, no, I don't eat shrimp. And he said, well, why don't you? And I said, well, you know, for me, it's just a biblical thing. So he started going to Romans 14, just like we're doing here. And he goes and just quotes it out of his, I guess he was Catholic. And he kept quoting it, and he's saying, you shouldn't be judging. I said, well, first of all, I'm not judging you for what you eat. You can eat all the shrimp you want to. I just prefer not to have any. And, you know, he said, so he went and sends this long email to me. It says, Romans 14 says you can eat any kind of food you want to. And he went on about something, and I just wrote him back a little simple thing. And I just said, I've read Romans 14. I've studied it. I've even asked people about it. And I said, I see nothing about saying you can eat or not eat. I'm saying this is a chapter more about judging the other person than it is anything in the entire Bible. And from then on, he never emailed me or anything again. I didn't get very many raises after that either.
Yeah. Let me clarify what I said earlier. You know, I'm not, you know, obviously I'm not talking about the obvious things. If someone says this is made with shrimp, you know, it's going to be there. The main ingredients are always the first things on the list.
Right.
But you can analyze everything very closely. And when you start to do that, there's a danger of you becoming a little bit too maybe self-righteous. Because if you look at anything closely enough, you're going to find some dirt. Okay, it doesn't matter what it is. You're going to find something that may not be right. What you're doing is you're doing your best you can, and you should always do that. But it's like, you know, many of the Jewish people who have made up so many traditions now about how they eat certain things, or whether they eat them on certain kinds of plates or something or another. You know, it's all to try to make yourself more righteous, when in reality,
exactly.
It's not and if you go at all. So you do your best, you be careful, but don't go to the nth degree of trying to analyze everything you eat, thinking it's going to make you more righteous, because it's not.
If you go to breakfast and you go out to eat at breakfast, and if you think that grill is perfectly cleaned before they cook your food, you're fooling yourself.
You're right.
Of course. Yeah, the hamburger patty they grilled for you may have had bacon cooked on it earlier. Now, did they clean it before they did it? Maybe. They maybe scraped it off. So here we go again. What is clean and what's not clean? You know.
But I was thinking of another example about emotional baggage. This actually happened with one of our members, a young guy. It was many years ago. He had an alcohol problem, and so bars, because it's not good for you. And by the way, I know this. There are people, especially in England and Germany when I was there, who go to pubs, you know, frequently, and they can drink 1 or 2 beers and not get drunk. Actually, the Germans can drink quite a few beers and appear at least not get drunk, from what I saw. I'll tell you more about later. But for some people, then he's out of bars. Well, he somehow convinced himself he had to go in this bar to save some of his drunken friends. It turned out very, very badly. If you've got an alcohol problem, at least for a few years, you need to stay out of bars and other people could probably go in there and it wouldn't affect them. Is that? But you have some emotional. And one man complained to me, you don't understand alcoholism. So I admittedly I don't understand it like someone who's a recovering alcoholic does. But all I'm saying is some people can do things and others can't. And I think what Paul is saying to the Christians, if these people are afraid to eat the meat because it's offered to idols, because the idol is in their mind, leave them alone. Maybe they'll grow out of it in time, but leave them alone. And I think our examples we might come up with today might be different, but the principle is still the same. Let's read Romans 14:3-4. Paul goes further in his discussion of tolerance.
Let let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand.
And Paul is saying emphatically, actually the both sides, he's saying to the purist, who said, I'm not going to touch any meat in the Roman the Roman markets because they may have, been contaminated by the presence of an idol. He's saying, don't you despise the others. And the more mature people who weren't worried about it, don't you despise them. It's easy to look down on people who don't understand things as well as you do. In time, they'll grow into it, we hope.
Right.
Yeah. We have a tendency to, because we have knowledge. Knowledge sometimes creates arrogance in people. And I know, Dr. Ricks, you've probably seen that in being in the educational circles that you run in. I'm sure you've seen plenty of that.
By the way, Germany was the most educated country in the world in the 1930s, and yet they fell for the fascism and Adolf Hitler. Does that prove to you that education, including higher education, and wisdom do not necessarily equate?
I think we can see that today in our political climate. Some of the most highly educated people are not too bright.
Let's go to Luke 18.
2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like this other men, extortioners, unjust adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I possess.
Now, I'm going to admit, it's hard for me to understand this because we live in a different world. But there are very, very religious people. I'm not saying they're righteous. There's a difference between the two. Like educated and wisdom are different. They're very religious. I'm not saying they're righteous. And they look for picky little things to accentuate their righteousness and show off to others. Well, apparently among Jews and Jewish proselytes in that first century, they debated which days to fast on. Now you're going to say, wait a minute, that's kind of crazy. Was it better to do it Sunday, Thursday, Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Friday? I know you're thinking they'd miss like 2 meals that day, maybe breakfast and lunch. And so out of the whole week, they might miss 4 meals where they spent time fasting, and they would tell other people about it. Oh, you're so holy, Pharisee Joe. But believe it or not, they debated such stupid stuff as that. I frankly can't assume why you would esteem, let's say if you went to Monday, Friday, well, let's say Monday, Thursday as your 2 best days to fast on, because maybe you want to leave Friday to get ready for the Sabbath. Well, and somebody else had maybe Sunday, Wednesday, and you would debate them. We could care less. Why would we care? But apparently some of them did.
I've seen people boast about not eating on the Sabbath, and some people boast about other certain topics, and sometimes they just keep harping on it, pushing it out there, trying to generate some kind of a response so they can seem holier than that other person. Eating on the Sabbath or not eating on the Sabbath doesn't matter. But if you're using it to kind of prop yourself up to make you better than another brother, is not a good idea.
That's what Paul was facing. I mean, I realize in our world we would laugh at it. It's so ridiculous. By the way, they would never have fasted, not Jews. They would never have fasted on the Sabbath. They knew the Sabbath was a holy day. And the Jews still believe this, that on the Sabbath they should have food and plenty of food. They do not fast on the Sabbath, except for atonement, of course. They know better than that. Let's look at Leviticus 23.
Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work on it. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings.
And it's a feast day. And feast means what it says. You feast, you eat well on that day. And we can maybe argue about some of the delicacies, whether you like them or not, of those gefilte fish and whatever the other stuff they eat. But
Yeah.
You know what I mean. It's feasting. So they would.
I like to focus.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I like to focus on this too. A lot of times, and especially in these scriptures right here, God says these are my feasts. He's not saying they're your feast. He's saying these are my feast. That's his feast, and people kind of get caught up in that. And I'm thinking, but he's telling you those are his days. Those are his feasts. They're not ours to do whatever we want to. God has not given man any kind of rules to say, or any law. And I guess some of us may have a little understanding of that. I don't know, but I just understand that these are always been the Eternal's feast. They're not man's. And so when they tell you they changed the day or whatever, I'm saying, who changed it? And then you're going to get to a scripture in a little while, and I look at the little words in there that'll tend to throw people off sometimes because they don't look at it that. I guess I'm a little bit weird here in Georgia, but they don't look at these things like that, and they look at it in different ways, just like in Romans 14. They look at it as they're judging somebody, but I said he's not taking, just like you said, not taking away the Sabbath, because God's Sabbath can't be taken away. He said, these are my feasts, just like that part right there.
It's like a dinner date with God.
Exactly.
Dinner date with God once a week. By the way, they're not the feast of the Jews. I know sometimes the way the Bible's translated, people think that, but it really is not the Jew. I mean, they have preserved them and they preserve the Old Testament, but it's not their feast. It's God's feast.
Yeah, and let me just make a comment about that. Yes, they were charged with keeping, as it says, the oracles of God, the laws, the true laws, as written. All the other things they added into that, they're not charged with keeping that. That God didn't create any of that. So my point is this: people sometimes confuse what the Jews were charged by God to keep, and they mix in everything else that they've created on their own. And they start to use that as part of the law when it's not even part of the law.
It does get hard to differentiate, but really, Judaism as it existed in the first century and much of what exists now is not the pure, true worship of God. I'm not putting the Jews down. I mean, they do good things and all that, good charity. My point is, even Christ, when he came, told his own people that you're putting your traditions ahead of God's laws. And one more thing, when you look at Adam and Eve, one of the key things when Satan told Eve and Adam, if you eat of the tree of good knowledge, you will be in a position that you can decide what is good and evil. Isn't that really at the heart of man's rebellion against God? We decide what's right and wrong instead of humbly relying on God to set all the standards.
That's exactly right. That's what's wrong with the world today. We've all got our own, I say we, I mean mankind in general, has his own idea of what's right and wrong. And most of the time, he's wrong.
And funny thing is, a lot of times things that are wrong sound good. You listen to some of these radical anarchists, Marxists, but other types of radicals too. It sounds good when they say it. It just defies the laws of nature or whatever. It doesn't work.
Well, sure. I mean, the concept of, we need to take care of the people who have less than we do, those that have nothing, those that are in the street, those that. But when you look deeper into what they're saying, they're wanting you to use somebody else's money to take care of those people. They don't want to use their own money to do that.
Liberalism.
Yeah, the scripture, John, just juggled my memory, and reminds me of Judges 21, and the last verse in there. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes, and that's pretty much what we see today.
Yeah, and we're gonna leave Romans 14 now, because we really know that those people were all Jews and Jewish proselytes. They would not have considered eating anything unclean. And they knew what Paul was talking about, fasting and food and drink, and the rest of the chapter will show you that. I want to focus on that verse about esteeming all days alike as an excuse for changing the Sabbath, because I believe that is a big problem in the world. People using that verse. You can esteem any day you want. And you see, if you take it the wrong way, you're undermining God's law, and that is not what Paul meant. Let's go to Acts 13.
And as they went out, they besought that these words might be spoken to them the next Sabbath. Now when the synagogue broke up, many of the Jews and of the devout proselytes followed Paul and Barnabas, who, speaking to them, urged them to continue in the grace of God.
Now, notice the word next Sabbath. The thought occurred to me, if 20 or 25 years prior to that, Christ and all the apostles said this, hey, we're just going to arbitrarily change the Sabbath with no really discussion. We're just going to switch it. Wouldn't Paul have said something like, well, we don't really have to come back next Sabbath. We can do it on the day most of the world does it, the day of the sun god, Sunday. Couldn't he have said that?
Yeah.
Wouldn't he have said that?
Yeah, they probably would have said, come back tomorrow, the day after the Sabbath.
Yeah, I mean, it's logical. Let's go to verse 44 and see what actually happened.
And the next Sabbath, almost the whole city was gathered together to hear the word of God.
But it was on the next Sabbath. Now, Paul doesn't go around defending the Sabbath. He takes it for granted that everybody who's reading Luke's letter and all the Christians and Jews as well know the Sabbath law is secure. They don't have to defend it.
At that time, there was only one Sabbath. And it was all the same day. Everybody understood what it meant.
Yes, it's true. So let's look at the powerful argument from silence, because this is a powerful argument that people have to understand. Argument from silence, and the argument goes like this: no apostle had ever come to Rome. The people there were, let's say, Christians who had not been organized and necessarily taught all the things they need to be taught. That's why the book of Romans is so basic. It's really a very basic book on grace, law, grace, Christ. Paul couldn't get to Rome when he wanted to go, so he sent this letter ahead of himself. So all the people in Rome were just Jews and Jewish proselytes who would have believed in the Sabbath. They would need no one to convince them of the Sabbath. And there's no way they would have assumed Paul is getting rid of the Sabbath. It was just something they would all take for granted. It's sort of like if Congress does not pass a law which changes a law, then the old law still is in effect. Does that make sense?
Right.
And nothing in the New Testament cancels the Sabbath law. There's no discussion of it. And the thing we go to is circumcision. Any of you that have read much of the book of Acts, you know that a big part of the New Testament is them making an exception. They didn't end circumcision for Jews, but they made an exception, especially for adult male Gentiles who would not have been circumcised as babies like they were. And that would have been very painful. It would have been basically a stay out sign to Gentiles. Few would cross that line. And that's how some of the more right-wing Pharisees wanted it. They only wanted a few Gentiles in. And Paul said it'd be the end. And yet they had all that discussion and meeting of it. And it keeps bouncing throughout Paul's New Testament letters. Well, if they had that much fight over making an exception, not ending it, but making an exception to the circumcision law, think of how much discussion they would have to make if they changed the Sabbath.
Yeah, well, a good analogy of what people believe about the Bible and what they read is just look at what people believe when they watch the news today. They watch the news, they say, oh, Trump is this. Oh, well, that's Trump's going to take away all our money. Trump's going to do this, or Biden's going to do this. They don't look into it and find out if what they're being told is true. They don't look deeper and find out the answers. People look at these things, but they don't look into the Bible. They listen to the man stand in the pulpit on Sunday and tell them that these words mean this, and they take that as gospel. That's granted. Okay, that's what it says. That's what the man means. They don't read the Bible themselves. They don't use their head. They don't use logic. They don't think through these things and say to themselves, okay, well, it says Sabbath. Well, why does it say Sabbath, but we're going to church on Sunday? They don't ask
It never
themselves
occurs
that.
to them. As far as they know, the Sabbath is Sunday.
Well, I think it does occur to some, but they choose to ignore it. And they rather just listen to the man tell them that it's, because he's going to take all the blame. He's telling me if he's
It's
lying,
on him.
it's
I
going to
have
be
no
his fault, not
responsibility
mine.
for my own salvation. I'm going to dump it all on this guy. That's about as true as it gets.
Exactly.
Well, I would argue this. If you want to be in the first resurrection, the higher positions, and help the world in the millennium, I just don't believe, God can do anything he wants, but I don't believe God's going to save anybody who doesn't learn to keep the Sabbath.
No.
God's not going to call a prophet who's a Sunday keeper, or at least he's going to have to quickly change. Don't you agree? And I know no one in the world believes that, but I believe it to be true. If God doesn't call you to the point where you understand the Sabbath, you will not be in the first resurrection. You're going to miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't know of any account in the Bible who was not already either part of Israel or called in some way. In fact, I'll just go on out on a limb and say you had to have been part of Israel for God to have even called you in any form up until the time he started calling Gentiles.
Well, just like you were saying, in order to be in the first resurrection, I was just looking at Revelation 22, and it says right there, plain as day, people will not read it, but it says, blessed are they that keep the commandments of God. And, that they have a right to the tree of life. So when you go through Revelation, at least 2 times, maybe 3 or 4, that it tells them, blessed are they that keep the commandments of God and do his commandments. So the Sabbath is not done away.
So true. And remember, all these people, and most people don't think about this. Didn't occur to me years later. All the Bible is written by Jewish men, and maybe there may be one proselyte to Judaism that's in the list, but it's pretty much New and Old Testament. And sometimes people forget that. And these people would definitely be big in the Sabbath. That's one of the two reasons Israel went into captivity. When they came out of captivity, the one thing you can say for them, they gave up idolatry and they stuck with the Sabbath after that. They learned those two lessons, if nothing else. Let's go to Luke 4:16.
And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and he entered, as his custom was, into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and stood up to read.
So Christ taught people and worshipped on the Sabbath day, and they don't have to defend it. It was just taken for granted. Let's go to John 7:10. Something else I think.
But when Jesus' brethren were gone up unto the feast, then he went also up, not publicly, but as it were in secret.
So Christ kept the annual Sabbaths even when his life was at risk and they were trying to kill him. So he had to go up secretly. But he did it, ran up on stage, spoke, and because he was who he was, so charismatic, the guards refused to arrest him, and it wasn't God's time for him to die as well. But he did that at the risk of his life. Because if the audience was so enamored with Christ, they probably would have stoned the police if they had tried to arrest him violently. That's how much Christ loved the Sabbaths and the feasts, that he kept them even at the risk of his life. Let's read Acts 15:21. These just show how they kind of take the Sabbath for granted.
They
don't think it's something to be debated. That's what I mean.
For Moses from generations of old hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath.
About it, that was said for Gentiles. What they are basically saying, when you read the context, is they were saying, look, maybe these Gentiles don't understand everything we Jews want them to know before we can eat with them and fellowship with them, but they'll learn more and more every Sabbath as they hear the Bible read. In those days, the Bible printing didn't exist. Scrolls were super expensive. They weren't available. You had to go to the synagogue on the Sabbath and hear it read. And they knew that's where the Gentiles would be, or that scripture wouldn't make any sense. And where the church was as well, of course. And then they went to probably separate places and preached on the words that they heard read. And let's go to Matthew 5:17. This is all part of what we call
Think not that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I came not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass away from the law, till all things be accomplished. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever shall do and teach them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
That's a pretty clear statement, isn't it? Heaven still exists. You can look up and see the North Star. You can jump up and down. My little house here is anchored in the earth.
Well, I actually butchered this particular scripture down at the feast when I was talking. I was reading in Mark, and somehow I got mixed up, and but I wanted to go to this scripture because, again, you got a 3-letter word in this one, till all the commandments are fulfilled. And the point I was trying to make is, since Christ died, I guess all the commandments have been fulfilled, right? Because that's what they're saying. But I'm saying, you shall do no murder. Since Christ died, there's never been a murder. You shouldn't lie. You shouldn't cheat. You shouldn't steal. You should keep the Sabbath day. You should love the Lord thy God with all your heart. And that was one of the things I was trying to get, that all these laws have been broken since Christ has died. So they have not been fulfilled yet. So
Well,
that's one of the arguments I use on people.
the written law will one day be gone because it will be written in the hearts of those that have been converted,
Right.
spiritually converted. That's why he says, till heaven and earth pass. We read Revelation, it clearly says that the earth is going to be dissolved, and that the heaven as we know it will be altered in some way. I mean, who knows where we will live. So yes, the written law will no longer be needed because there will be no human beings at that point. They will all be spiritual beings with the law ingrained into them, just as it is within God the Father and Jesus Christ.
Think of a world where everybody is so secure that they don't need to try to one up somebody else. They don't need to worry about stealing what somebody else has. They all know what's what and who's in charge. And I mean, think of a world where no one even has a reason to lie and wouldn't lie, because they don't want to ruin relationship with each other. And that will be fabulous, right?
We won't even know how to lie. I mean, we'll know what a lie is, obviously. I mean, God knows what a lie is, but it wouldn't cross our minds.
There'd be no need to. No, it would be unnecessary. Like stealing will be unnecessary because you won't need anything. Adultery will be unnecessary for they don't give in marriage, and a lot of it will just be it won't exist anymore to do these things.
Yeah. And I think if someone would say, if you look at the spiritual world and Satan's rebellion, he lost humility and wanted to be like God or above God or with God, however you want to word it, and kind of a coup to take over. That's vanity and ego. That is a spiritual danger, but that's why we learn stuff in this life. We learn to be humble so that we won't have to worry about it. And I think you won't, a lot of times people who misbehave deep down are insecure. Does that make sense? You just don't always see it. They cover it up. We will have no reason to be like that, to need to show off. Does that make sense?
Has any of you, and I'll speak for myself in a minute, but have any of you ever met someone who was not humble, or at least not, the way you should be in terms of being a Christian? Have you ever met someone like that became humble, truly, or did they just get humbled? Everybody can be humbled. I mean, you can do something wrong. You can be found out, humiliated in public, and be humbled in that respect. But do you truly become humble? You know what I'm saying? Ingrained within you. I don't know that I've ever met anyone like that that didn't already have humility ingrained in them. So I wonder about whether God calls people because, for one, they have a certain amount of humility within them that other people don't have. You have to be humble in order to bow yourself to what we read in this Bible, to acknowledge that you're wrong and that God is right, and to truly, faithfully follow that takes a certain type of humility.
Well, God says that the future belongs to those that are humble and meek in Matthew 5. But I believe that's the thing one of the things we should try to get out of this life. Because I don't think in the spirit world in the future, we have anything to worry about. Like you say, I believe you won't need food. You'll only eat when you want to for the fun of it, but you won't have to have food to sustain yourself. You'll be like they always in sci-fi, they speculate on an energy source that is a battery that doesn't need charging. I can't explain it, but you know what I mean. Self-charging
Pure
battery
energy
that has eternal energy.
Yeah, the kind of energy that we have no concept of at this point.
Yeah. And I don't think mankind, well, we'll see, has ability to build something that is energy that can't run down. I don't know how to word that.
Perpetual.
But that's what we'll have in the future when we're in God's family.
Right. No, absolutely.
And that's what immortality is. You'll be forever young and you won't have to worry about it.
Right. I think that's what it was. Obviously, what he meant when no eye has seen or ear has heard what God has, in store for us, basically, to paraphrase, when we are in his kingdom as his children.
And like you see some people, I could be wrong about this, but you see someone like Nancy Pelosi, I'd bet you 10 to 1 that she's had plastic surgery.
Are you kidding? She looks like Bozo the Clown. Her eyebrows are like whoop, whoop.
Yeah.
She's the most
I
ridiculous
don't want to
looking
offend
person I ever
anybody because
seen.
I know she's a mother and all that stuff. But you can see they're trying. And getting old is not, fun as far as appearance and health goes. But we won't have to worry about that sort of
Her
thing.
skin's been pulled back so many times, her navel's up in here somewhere. I mean, it's bad. It's real bad.
Okay, as long as I can, if I want to become flesh, materialize as flesh, I want to be able to materialize the way I want to look. Okay. I want to come back looking like Brad Pitt or somebody like that. I don't want to look like me.
That won't
Or
mean
I
a
just
thing
like
to us.
materialize as I did when I was a young man.
Oh, we just saw a movie. I'm not saying it was an interesting movie where the character deals with a young version of himself. And the striking, I guess he played both parts. He's 51, but his clone is 21 or something like that. The difference between the two in appearance is like, wow, that's only 30 years.
Yeah.
But that's more of a realistic view of the way
Right.
it is, right? He looks so much better at 21. Anyway, we're getting off the subject. But one petty like people are today.
No, it won't
You
matter.
have no
to us.
need to be. Yeah. Let's go to Exodus 31:13.
Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily ye shall keep my Sabbaths, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am Jehovah who sanctifieth you.
I want to emphasize the word sign. It's like you could wear a sign on you, that shows you're in a political party or you're in the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, whatever. God says people notice which day we go to church on. It's a sign that marks you to the Creator God, because He created, the seventh day and that in the book of Genesis, that sets us to have notice. If a church of God decides someday to change the Sabbath, or say it doesn't matter which day we keep Saturday or Sunday, they'll end up drifting to Sunday, of course, it's easier. The moment they do that church date, I've seen that happen, and it's like that's the one thing. I mean, there are doctrines you can kick around, but that's one doctrine. When you touch that, you're on a slippery slide to apostasy.
How did the worldwide work out after they changed it?
Disaster.
Yeah.
And so my point is, and also they dropped the annual Sabbaths. That didn't make things any better. They tried to make a substitute for the feast. Well, we can have summer camp in July for 3 or 4 days. It isn't the same thing.
No, there's nothing like the Feast of Tabernacles. Not one thing that I can think of.
So it is a sign, and Paul would never have been writing in Romans 14 to people that were very Jewish, that they could avoid that. And they knew that's not what he was talking about. They understood. He was talking about eating and drinking and which days to fast on, which seems to me to be super petty, but some religious people are super petty. Would you agree?
Anything that builds them up and tears others down.
And by the way, I think Romans 14 was talking about people being forced into vegetarianism because they were afraid of the meat. If someone chooses vegetarianism for health reasons, that's a whole nother issue. And no one, I mean, why do I care if you, and by the way, probably in the Garden of Eden, they were vegetarians. I mean, you could imply that from the way it's written. And vegetarianism is a healthy way to live if you know how to do it right.
Yeah, I believe that. You know, after all, when God kicked them out, he had to make clothes for them. He made clothes from the skins of animals. So obviously, if they knew how to do that already, they would have made their own clothes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the other thing too about that I've been thinking over the years is that, you know, you find a lot of cures to diseases we have within certain plants that's already growing on this earth. And then you find these, and I have no doubt in my mind that, you know, when Christ comes back, the cure for cancer is going to be something that maybe grows in your yard or something that simple, you know, and those kind of things that'll cure it. Now, I know that Prevagen from squids is working on a potential candidate for the presidency, but that being left aside, and that's a joke. So, so yeah, just a little bit small. Well, how else can the guy come out and just, you know, go 10 or 15 minutes? I can't figure that out. But really, my wife and them, they'll take and make a pine needle tea. And they drink that during the wintertime as their vitamin C, because it's very high in vitamin C, and it gives them the vitamin C. And we got plenty of pine trees. They'll go out and get their pine needles and make a tea. So it's natural. And I've been hearing, you know, Tom, I think we were hearing a lot of that down at the feast, that people are taking certain not vegetables, but certain things from, you know, health stores that are out of the herbs of the ground, and they're making them feel better. And so I have no doubt that pretty much all man's ills are going to be cured from some kind of vegetable or something like that.
Well, most all modern day medicines are derived from plants,
right?
Especially plants from the rainforest,
like penicillin. By the way, I would think everybody would agree with this. Most people need to eat more fruits and vegetables and whole grains, especially fruits and especially vegetables. I'm not saying the meat, you get certain things out of meat, or you can get them from vegetables if you know how to do it, eat the right ones. Like, I think it's soybeans and other things, but to have the right kind of proteins. But I think if we eat more vegetables, even if we do eat meat, we'll be healthier. I think Americans, because food is, compared to other countries, relatively cheap, we eat probably too much meat and not enough vegetables. Would you agree?
Sure. Most people don't grow gardens. I mean, that's what we should have. Everybody should have their own garden. Leafy greens, lots of greens, collard greens, kales, you know, all those things that are high in antioxidants. And we don't know how to garden. I mean, we have a garden. We had a small one, but there's people that know how to garden, and they can grow what they want throughout the entire year, so that it's never, you know, without.
It's kind of difficult up here, but yeah.
We've had a garden. We've always had a garden up until the last year or two, and then we found out that we were growing our garden for deer in our backyard. So I said, well, look, I got meat right there, so I'm good. But seriously, she was just wearing our garden out. And the funniest thing is, you'll get a cantaloupe, or was it cantaloupe or cucumbers? I think it was. And when one of them, I forgot what it was, but the silly thing would eat the flower. Well, that might have been rabbits, but they would eat the flowers before they even turn into the fruit or the vegetable, whatever it was. The squash, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And, you know, the deer was wearing out my tomato plant. So although they were technically a fruit, but she would wear them out. I couldn't keep anything in there. And then looked out there a couple months ago, and lo and behold, there's like 5 or 6 deer out there. See, she's gonna have a bunch of babies now.
So hey,
So
your
I said,
vegetables
we
are
gotta
now
figure out a way to
meat.
get for the deer. Yeah,
Get yourself a nice shotgun and go hunting.
The figs are okay. We can live with the figs.
Reminds me of a joke Bill Cosby told one time about his wife left the kids with him to take care of, to feed them breakfast and whatever. So he gave them chocolate cake. And he said, well, it's got eggs, it's got flour, it's got all these good things in it. So it's good for you.
Well, the one thing we know that tolerance does not mean lawlessness. Paul was preaching tolerance in Romans 14, but he was not saying the law was done away. And that's just a misunderstanding by people who haven't yet really understood the Bible. Criticize somebody else's servant over things you don't agree with. For instance, I believe that we do not need to argue over using restaurants on the Sabbath. Whichever position you take, that's fine. It's nothing to argue over. I just think it's not an issue that's worth arguing. Another one that I'll mention that some will argue over is gelatin. According to one of my sons, who's a little bit of a scientist, he says that when they finish cooking certain molecules and they string them out, it's no longer whatever it came from, or something like that. I know you can get gelatin from vegetable sources, cows,
Fish.
pigs, and other. But some people say, I won't eat any gelatin. Like if they give you gelatin in the hospital, who knows? It might ultimately have come from a pig. My opinion is they have changed that chemical structure of that molecule so much that I don't think it really matters where it came from. But I wouldn't argue with somebody. If somebody is afraid of gelatin, hey, that's fine.
I am. Sorry.
Well, if you're going to examine it that closely, why are you not examining every other aspect of your life that closely? Some things which are more important for you to look at than what you're eating. It's the old, get the beam out of your eye before you tell somebody else how to fix their life. It just boggles my mind that we can have those in the church that are willing to look at the ingredient list on a product to see if they can find some little, they're down at the bottom, okay, that's unclean, I can't eat it, but yet they're willing to ignore and neglect their own brethren in the church. Which is more important, staying with your church family and taking care of them, or worrying about what you're eating? It's all about the people. God wants us to take care of each other. The church is the people. And if we don't look after each other first, we're not going to get into the kingdom of God.
And by the way, if some of you are afraid to eat gelatin, that's fine. I don't eat that much gelatin anyway. I rarely eat it because of the sugar and stuff. But if you don't want to eat it, that's fine. It's not an issue one way or the other as far as I'm concerned. But one more scripture. Let's read Romans 15:1.
Now we that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak, and not to please ourselves, for Christ also pleased not himself.
Yeah, and Paul is saying, if you're the strong one and you really understand things in a more balanced, mature way, you should kind of give way and leave the weak brethren alone. Don't show up their lack of understanding. Give them plenty of time and room to grow. And even if they never grow out of what you think is a weak, picky, self-righteous position, that's fine. It's between them and God. It doesn't really matter.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think anybody should judge anybody for anything. I learned early in my life that you don't judge anybody way before the church, but you don't judge anything. So if somebody prefers to eat fish gelatin marshmallows like we do and cook them in the fireplace when we have them, that's fine. But we don't. Tom's exactly right. If you're going through every single ingredient and you're picking out all these little things, and all of a sudden, you find a little something in there that may or may not be unclean, and you're not looking at your own self, then you've really got a bigger problem than just eating the unclean food. Besides, Christ says it's not what comes out, but it's not what goes in your body, it's what comes out of your body.
Yeah, those spiritual things that you're absorbing are much more dangerous than if a little speck of dirt. By the way, did you know there were Pharisees who put a net over their face when they went in the bazaar marketplace? Because gnats buzzed around in those days, especially, might somehow pop in his mouth and he might swallow it by accident. He had to be so pure. He walked around with a net over his face.
Right.
Isn't that impressive?
Well, they'd also come back from having walked around all these unclean pagan people. They'd come back and do all kinds of washings, and just in case they accidentally touched one of them.
By example, today, you have to wear a mask everywhere you go. So I don't know what's the difference.
I think it's that same kind of picky purist, but from what I have been told, the New England Journal of Medicine at the end of May had an article saying that masks, especially the kind worn commonly, were very, very little use indoors and totally useless outdoors. Totally useless.
That's the paper mask. That is absolutely 100% true.
But then they were pressured later by, I guess, people who think it's politically to their advantage to get the American people zombie-like obedience. They backed off it. Not that they changed they just said, well, people want to wear masks, that's okay. A couple, I think 3 or 4 or 5 weeks later. But I'm not saying that when you're in certain hospital settings and indoor tight, it might be good. Although I'm told truly surgical masks, or those masks that really cut off the air supply tight, have a little filter on the side, those are the ones you really need, and they change those frequently. I think doctors change, like between every operation, they get a brand new mask.
Mm-hmm.
Most people's masks sit in their car getting dirty.
Hanging from their mirror.
Well,
in the
you
hot
gotta
sunlight.
have decorations nowadays.
I'm not against people being careful. I realize COVID is serious, especially if you're older. So I'm older too. I guess we should be careful. But I do think it's that same kind of thinking. Don't you see it?
Well, this that sign of the times. I've spoken about it many times before. But you go into a store, if I own the store, masks are optional. But when you go into the store, if I own that store and they say mask required and I forget it, I walk back to my vehicle, especially when I go into that store. I go grab a mask, and I have a cloth one I wear. I started wearing those a lot more because the paper ones, I know for a fact, only are good in sterile environments, and they're only good for 30 minutes to an hour anyway. So, so it's either way. I understand, I don't want to get it either. Nobody does. But I think it is way overblown a little bit.
Like, I almost think I've heard this said. Nobody's actually, well, only one lady. A lady comes up to you in the store and she self-righteously lectures you on, you're not wearing a mask. You're not as good and conscientious citizen as the rest of us. Don't you see a certain Pharisaical thinking in there?
Yeah. We didn't wear masks anywhere we went when we were in Myrtle Beach, except one store we went into. This woman says, you got to wear a mask to be in here. Would you like a mask? I said, no, thank you. And I just left. And we all left. We just didn't go in there, didn't look around, didn't spend any money, just said, no, thank you. We went into every other store there. Probably was in 20 or more stores. Nobody said a word except that one self-righteous older woman.
Yeah. So, and I know that people might disagree with me. maybe some people push it because they really believe they're saving the world because that's what they've been told by the media. And I guess we shall see. Um, as far as world prophecy goes, I don't know of anything going on that we haven't mentioned before, except I would tell people to watch China. China is really interested in our election. Did you know that when the vice president debate was going on, the Chinese only showed the Democratic side of the debate? Our Mike Pence's was blacked out. They didn't see him. Now, what does that tell you about what China wants? They clearly are hoping, well, maybe they won't pray, but maybe they're praying to Mao Zedong's ghost, something that Trump loses because they know they've already paid for certain people.
Oh yeah, they want their money's worth.
Yep.
And so I think if China, I believe China's having problems. The pressure on them is still there. And if something drastically happens in China, I think it'll affect the whole world. I just say watch China, maybe right after the election, especially if China doesn't get what they want. I just say watch it. We'll see. What do you think, Ken?
Yeah, I think China's definitely a big player to watch right now. I mean, everybody's just holding their breath to see what happens, and all of our enemies are hoping that it's going to be the Biden and the left gets in. So they're easy to deal with because you just got to buy them off. Hard to buy off a billionaire who just doesn't care. But I only have one question. I have a question. It's
Yeah,
been 212 days. Have we flattened the curve yet? Just curious. Because that's all it was. Wash your hands, flatten the curve. We're out of this in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We're done, right? Yeah, right.
Right.
Well, I think evil is evil senses. They have a great opportunity now. Also, and maybe this will play out in a week or two in the future, but I think if they pack the Supreme Court, that's the end
Oh
of
yeah, if he gets
democracy in
in, we're
America.
done.
No
They
doubt.
will rig it so another Republican or
Um,
conservative will never get elected from now till eternity. They will never allow another conservative to get into any position of power if they win the House, the presidency, and the Senate. It's over.
because if they could pack the court, let's say the people of some little out of way state like Iowa, Missouri, or Texas, maybe Texas not little, but they passed a law they didn't like. They simply take it to court. And when it got to the Supreme Court, their packed court would automatically do what the liberals want. That's they kick out of here. So the court would just become another pro-left legislative body in perpetuity. There would be no more. Maybe the court's never been as good as it should be, but it won't be
It'll
the
just be
Supreme
another
Court
political
anymore.
entity.
And yeah, and the thing is, even when FDR had 2/3 of Congress, I mean, he had all the power. The Democrats in the 1930s would not pack the court. They recognized, I mean, they wanted to follow FDR's plan. He was popular, but even they realized, no, what happens after FDR is gone if we pack the court? This is the end of the Supreme Court and democracy as we know it. They had more character in the 1930s, they wouldn't do it. But I believe because they won't say we will definitely not do it, what does that tell you? So a lot is at stake in the next 4 or 5 weeks in the world, and I could be wrong. Everything could work out perfectly no matter who gets elected, but I don't think so.
Right. It's going to be real interesting.
And next week, we're going to go into one of the basic truths of the Bible again and try to add additional understanding. And I hope people can tune in because I think these sessions will be very edifying
Good.
for all of us.
Well, good night, gentlemen. Unless there's anything else we want to talk about. I hope everyone had a wonderful feast. I know we did. We had a great feast down there. Had to spend a lot of time with a lot of people, and it was good. Good night, everyone. We'll see you all back here next Sabbath.
We're happy you could make it, so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we've got to say goodbye.